Hey, Nathan here. Welcome back to another C++ video. Last video we discussed conditional branching, using the if, else, else if, and those statements. There is another statement that we'll get into later, but in this tutorial we're going to discuss looping, and the main concept with looping is, you might have let's take a real world example here. Let's take a video game example, since this is this is what will go into the DirectX series. So let's say you have a list or an array of elements. You have a giant list of elements in your game, and you need to update each one of those elements. So you use a loop. You don't want to call element 1 update, element 2 update, element 3 update, element 4 update. That's unnecessary code. So instead, you have all these elements in a single list container that you can loop through, and then you only call update once, but you do that in each element in that list. And that's another topic we'll get into later, but that's a real world example of why this is useful. You have a list of things that you need to perform actions on, and you can easily do that with a loop instead of calling element 1 update, element 2 update, element 3 update, or things like that. Or, for example, if you want to, in mathematics, if you want to do a sum of all the numbers from 1 to 10, you don't want to do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. You want to do it in a way that you can easily extend on it if you want to. If you want to change it from adding numbers from 1 to 10 to 1 to 5, that's easily changeable in a loop instead of deleting 5 numbers that you don't need anymore, and then it's just easier to manage. Okay, so looping also uses some Boolean expressions. And last tutorial was a brief introduction on how to do that. So I put in the code here 2 slashes. That means it's a comment. It'll be ignored by the compiler, but anybody looking at the code, it's for humans, for readers to know what's going on. It's a line that will be ignored. That double slash is a single line comment. That will be ignored by the compiler. And then I can write some stuff that only you or I can read. Okay, so Boolean expressions are something that will evaluate from true to false. And we discussed one of those in the last tutorial, and I want to discuss a few more in this tutorial. So we discussed A less than B, and then I'll just list all the other ones. So that evaluates to true if A is less than B. So if 3 is less than 5, that will evaluate to true. 5 is not less than 3, so that will evaluate to false. Less than or equal to. That will evaluate to true if 3 is less than or equal to 3. That will evaluate to false if 5 is less than or equal to 3, because 5 is not less than or equal to 3. Same thing, greater than. 5 is greater than 3, that evaluates to true. 3 is greater than 5, that evaluates to false. Greater than or equal to, same thing. Equals, that evaluates to true if 3 is equal to 3. 5 does not equal to 3, so that is false. Not equal to. 3 does not equal to 5, so that will be true. 5 does not equal to 3, that will be true. 5 does not equal to 5, that will be false. So these are the most common ones that you will encounter. The less than, the greater than, the equals, and the not equals. Those are the most common ones you will run into when you want to do some conditional or Boolean expression checking. Now, what if you want to do two of them? Let's say A is less than B. What if you also want to check if C is greater than D? What if you want to check both of those and evaluate to true if they're both true? Then we use and two ampersands. C is greater than D. So this evaluates to true or false. It evaluates to true if both of these, and you can provide the parentheses in here. I find it easier to manage if everything's grouped into their own set of parentheses. So if this is true and this is true, this whole line becomes true. Now, what if you want it to be true if only one of those is successful? That is for or, which is two vertical lines. And that key, you can find that above the enter key on your keyboard. It has the slash, and then you hold shift, and then that's the vertical line. You just put two of those in there, that means or. So that means only one of these has to be correct before the whole line becomes true. Okay, so this tutorial will cover looping, and what we're going to do for a test, for an example, is let's add all the numbers between 1 and 10. Let me provide a comment here. Remember, the two slashes means that that's a comment, a single line comment. We cannot add another line here. If you want to do multiple lines, you provide a slash and then the asterisk. And then to end it, asterisk slash. You reverse them. That ends the multi-line comment. But I'm just going to use a single line comment for now. Okay, so the first looping we're going to discuss, the first type of loop we're going to discuss is called for. Now, the for loop will allow us to initialize and declare and initialize a number, check for a Boolean expression, and then increment that number or variable however we want it to increment. It'll do all those in a nice for declaration. So for, open in parentheses. The first part is variable init, declare and init. Semicolon, Boolean expression, semicolon, variable increment, decrement, and then closing parentheses, and then you have opening and closing curly brackets there. Alright, so the first part, we declare and initialize a variable that we will be using in the for loop. The second part, we need to have a Boolean expression. That way the for loop has some way to quit. We have a condition to check, just like the if condition. We have a condition to check, and then when that condition is false, it will quit the for loop. That way we do not have an infinite loop. And then the last part, we need to increment or decrement or multiply or divide, whatever you want to do. We need to do some manipulation to the variable. Typically, it's incrementing or decrementing the variable. You know, the variable increments by 1 each loop, and then you want to create the sum for that. Okay. So, this tutorial is going to have a lot of mini discussions. We already discussed comments. Now we're going to discuss a quick way to add 1 to the variable. So let's say we have an integer here called x, and that's going to be 1. Later on the road, let's say in this part here, where we want to increment or decrement, let's say we want to increase that by 1 in the for. A quick way to do that is x plus plus. That is shorthand for x is equal to x plus 1. So x plus plus is shorthand for x is equal to x plus 1. So instead of saying x is equal to x plus 1, we can say x plus plus in this final part here. So let's go ahead and create the for loop. Enough discussion on that stuff. Okay, like I said, let's add up everything, all the numbers between 1 and 10, and see the result. So I'm going to create an int sum here, and that's going to be 0. It's going to start at 0 because we haven't added anything yet. And then we're going to see out sum, and then we're going to syn.get so it doesn't quit the program right away. In between these two lines here, where we print out the sum and where we initialize and declare the sum variable, we're going to create the for loop here. Okay, now the first part is declaring and initializing the variable. Int x, usually it's x, y, or I and j. You might see I and j in a lot of things. So let's say int I is equal to 1. We start with 1. Then we have a Boolean expression, I less than or equal to 10. You can say less than 11 or less than or equal to 10, either way. I'm going to go less than or equal to 10. Now we have the increment or decrement. Remember, we want to add everything, all the numbers between 1 and 10. All the, integers. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. We want to add all those up to 10. So we need to increment I by 1 each loop. I plus plus. Now we have opening and closing curly brackets there. Sum is equal to sum plus I. So that's all we need to do in the for loop. Remember, we're repeating the same thing multiple times. That's what the looping is for. So the result is 55. That's summing every integer starting at 1 up and including to 10. Now let's say if you want to do it 20, or let's say 100. That's a quick way to do this because you don't have to write 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 ... plus 99 plus 100. You don't have to write all those numbers. You just have to change one little thing in your Boolean expression here, and then it will add all the integers from 1 to 100. And the result is 5050. Or let's say you want to do it 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. And there's the result. So looping is a nice way to do repetitive things in a nice small fashion. We do not have to put pluses between every integer from 1 to 100,000. That would be ridiculous to have a programmer do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, ... A loop will allow us to do that in a nice manner. So that is the for loop, and we're using an actual value here in our loop. And if you want to do something like that, you'll want to use a for loop, where if you want to use some variable you have set up in the for loop here. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Next one is a while loop, and a while loop is just a simple loop. It will do whatever you have inside the brackets, It'll do whatever is inside the loop block until the Boolean expression is false. While Boolean expression is true, it will perform logic inside this bracket. Okay, let's take an example here. Let's say you're tasked with a way to get a set of data. Alright, let's give this example. Let's say you're tasked with a way to get a large number to the highest representation of bytes. So they give you byte, the value of byte. It could be 100, 1,000, 100,000, 1 million, and you need to get the highest representation of that byte. Is it a byte? Is it a kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte, terabyte, or higher? We're tasked with a way to represent that. And we need to represent it in the appropriate, 3.5 gigabytes, 1.8 megabytes. We need to represent it appropriately by the 0.8. So for those that you do not know, 1 kilobyte is equal to 1024 bytes. 1 megabyte is equal to 1024 kilobytes. 1 gigabyte is equal to 1024 megabytes. So that just keeps on going on and on and on. It's 1024 every time. So our input is going to be, we know 100% our input is going to be in bytes. We need to represent that input in the highest value. Is it kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, anything? We need to represent it in the highest value. So we have a while loop. Let's say our int x is equal to 103456. We want to represent that in the highest value. And right now, we do not care if it's kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes. We just want to get that value to where it's like 1.8 or 2.5 or something like that. We want to perform logic until that is less than 1024. If it's 1024, it can go up one more level. So here's a thinker here. This is wrong right now. Why is that wrong? What if we want to represent it by 1.8? Remember, in the previous tutorial, we discussed variables. What can integer not do? It cannot do floating point values. So let's go ahead and do a double here. So double x. While x is greater than 1024. Remember, if it's equal to 1024, it can be represented by a higher value. It can be, if it's 1024 bytes, it can be represented by kilobytes. Okay, so while it's greater than 1024, we want to divide it by 1024. So x is equal to x divided by 1024. And after all that's done, we want to see out x. Okay, so this will take the input and evaluate it to the highest represented value. It cannot be 1024. It has to be something below that. If it's 1024, it'll be 1.0. Any other value higher than 1024, it'll divide by 1024 each time. So our input evaluated to 1010.33. So that is one way that the while loop is useful. It will perform logic until that condition becomes false. 1010 is indeed less than 1024, so that stops the loop. And then we go to this line here and we print out the result. So later on, we can extend this program and actually display what the result is. Is it kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, petabytes, terabytes, whatever. Later on, we'll get to that point, but for now, I think that's a good demonstration of the while loop. There is one more that I'll not go into, and it is the do while loop. It's basically the while loop, except it will always perform one time. Do, then you have the block here. I'll just create a comment here. So we have do while Boolean expression. It will always perform logic here. It'll always perform logic here once. Then it checks the condition. If the condition is still true, it'll repeat the process. So do while and while are pretty much the same. You have the while and you have the condition, except for do while always performs the logic at least once, every single time. It does logic and then checks the condition, then does the logic again, then checks the condition. While loop checks the condition, then does the logic. Okay, so that is it for looping. We'll discuss one more looping later on, and that is the for each. And then we'll discuss that later on because we haven't gotten into arrays and lists and that kind of thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a good understanding on Boolean expressions. Last video ran a little short. I was still a little bit sick, so I didn't really get into discussing the expressions, less than, greater than, double equals, exclamation point equals, what those mean. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a good understanding on looping. Yeah, we discussed the for loop in great detail and the while loop in great detail. So later on, next video, we will extend this code and actually extend what we need to provide here. We will extend this by providing if it's kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, and so on. Okay. So, I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.